Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted and privileged to welcome a very, very accomplished marketer and entrepreneur from Lithuania, Mr. Jatin Modi. Jatin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Jatin is the founder and CEO of Renaissance. He's a C-suite advisor, and he has been inducted into the Paul Writers Hall of Fame for contribution to marketing. Jatin, you seem to have achieved a lot at a very, very early stage of your life. Today, let's talk about Renaissance and marketing. Tell me about this venture and what work you do.
Super, absolutely. So, Renaissance is a global B2B marketing firm, and I think the interesting thing that we find in the thesis that we're building out the company is that B2B marketing in general is at an inflection point where earlier B2B business development was largely done with feet on street. So you had sales professionals going out to enterprises, shaking hands, having a cup of coffee, building deals and deal flow. But over the last few years, I think that has completely transformed itself, where a B2B buyer is typically first researching online and is very clear about who he wants or has a very clear understanding of that. And when only then does he or she pick up the phone and place a call to a supplier or partner or vendor. And I think that creates incredible disruption for the entire B2B game and opportunities for people who are able to really leverage this.
Okay.
And as a company, what we have done is we've built a global platform. So we have people in 3 continents as part of our team. And we allow for Indian B2B companies to scale globally and global enterprise-focused B2B companies to grow in India and create really that bridge across the world.
Oh, interesting. And you say that you want to move beyond the conferences, events era to power the deployment of brand demand and ABM goals. Please explain this to me with an example.
Well, earlier, let's examine how relationships were built. An executive or somebody in sales in a B2B organization would be either a sponsor or an exhibit. It would be a showcase at an exhibition where they would be talking about themselves, trying to build relationships out there. Now, the thing is, that piece is almost completely disrupted. And we've especially seen that with the pandemic.
Correct.
That instead of going to exhibitions and to conferences, people are doing what you are doing, Ashutosh, that people are building relationships one-on-one online. And although we've never met each other, by the end of this conversation, at least we'll have a semblance of the beginning of a relationship, which might be based on a deeper connection than what we would have done had we met at a conference. And so therefore, the impetus is on B2B companies to be able to build those relationships because the buyer is going to buy from the first 2 or 3 people that comes to their mind when they're in the buying cycle. So as an example, let's assume you're about to buy an enterprise software which allows your company to scale. Let's say a system like SAP. So now there are hundreds of companies in the world that build systems like SAP. There's Salesforce, there's Freshworks, there is Zoho, and there are tons of other SaaS-based platforms which are out there. Now let's assume a company is wanting to buy a software like that. What is the typical behavior that they would exhibit? A buying committee will be formed. A buying committee will decide that, hey, who are the top 3 players we should consider for this? Somebody will be given the responsibility to research this. This researcher is not going to go to wait for a conference to develop his opinion. He is going to go online, put a post out on LinkedIn, go to a bunch of review sites, shortlist maybe 10 players in this ecosystem, go through their websites, and form an initial impression of who the 5 players can be who he can invite for a pitch or a discussion. Once he shortlists the 5 players, and that'll be based on how these companies are positioned, how they're communicating, what's the core value proposition, whether this buyer is firmly, the company is focused on this buyer. For example, an SMB will be differently placed versus an enterprise. And then they're going to invite these people in, and based on that, they're going to take a decision. So essentially, you're not even in the consideration set if you're not doing well digitally.
Right.
And that's, I think, the opportunity for B2B players is that if they do this well, they do the demand work and the ABM work online really well, they come in the consideration set such that when a buyer is in the buying cycle, there'll be a very high chance that they will look positively upon them and think of them as a vendor of first choice.
Fascinating. So moving on, let me come to some of the basics of marketing, since you do so much marketing. And for our young viewers and listeners, is marketing a science or an art?
I would imagine it's both. I think marketing strategy can be certainly very scientific, but for you to have vision in being able to decide what strategy you want for, I think that's very art and it's very intuitive, and right, it's formed with multiple interactions that you have with the world around you, right? And how you form linkages around that, and somewhere you have vision about what you want to do.
Yeah.
So I think it starts with vision. I think that's artistic in nature, and then the strategy probably is more science, and then the execution is a bit of both. It's both left and right brained.
Well said.
Yeah, that's probably how I would deconstruct it.
No,
how would you
that's
think
a great
about
response. No, that's an absolutely great response. I agree with you. And, again, you work with so many different organizations. My next question to you, Jatin, is on brands.
Yes.
Brands to me are always living beings. I mean, I've always said brands are like children and they need constant nurturing. What goes into building a successful brand?
That's a fantastic question, and I'm very passionate about this topic. So, let me give you my thesis, and I'm very interested in what you have to say as well. So let's take that living being analogy as an example, right? I think fundamentally, today what is happening is that a lot of brands are thinking about the customer first, which is that they want to listen to customers and adjust and develop a brand,
correct,
which is based on data analytics and so on, which I believe is antithesis to what you said, which is that it's a living being. Now the living being first forms its own personality and has a clear conviction of their vision, of what they stand for, what their values are, what is non-negotiable in their character. And then based on that personality, you then go about attracting a tribe which organizes itself around you because they're attracted to these natural attributes that you exhibit. And I believe that the most powerful brands out there are the brands which first understand really who they are, what they stand for, what are their values, what will they never negotiate for. And they express that so compellingly that customers, employees, and other stakeholders find themselves compellingly attracted to them.
Correct.
And say, hey, if I want to work with somebody, I'd rather work with you because, I love how you think. And it's not about the product. It's not about the service. It's about how you think. So just as an example, my favorite brand in the world is Apple.
Correct. Correct.
Now, Apple is a clear stand, and their vision is that they want to make your life simpler
Mm.
in how you live your entire electronical life, right? It
Mm.
should be simple. And if you look at their products, right, everything is made for your life to become simpler.
Absolutely.
How Mac interacts with iPhone, interacts with AirPods, interacts with iPad, and so on and so forth.
Mm.
Once you start using it, you just cannot work anywhere else. You
Correct.
can't do anything
Mm.
in consumer electronics with any other brand because everything else is clunky and difficult.
Mm. Mm.
So the vision is clear, and they are never negotiating on that by saying, "Oh, let me build a cheaper AirPod because the consumer wants it,"
Mm.
or let me build interactivity with an Android phone
Mm.
because the consumer wants it. It's like, hey, we're going to give you the best experience out there, and
Mm.
if you want
Yeah.
it, come to us. Otherwise, you're free to go to Android. No
Absolutely
problem.
right. Absolutely right. And that's probably the reason why from the very first day, Apple has never had a user manual for any of its products.
Yeah,
Well said.
absolutely.
Very well said. So, Amit, the other question that I have on brands is that, based on the amazing response you just gave, uh, there are some brands which last 100 years and some which die in an year or short or lesser. Is your hypothesis that, because they have studied the consumer, because they have stuck to their guns, because they have not compromised, what some of the reasons why these brands survive for such long periods?
I would argue so, but I would also say that these brands stand the test of. We have a client, which is one of the largest uh, manufacturing companies in the world. It's
Mm-hmm.
French.
Mm-hmm.
They've been around for the last 180 years,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they've just imagine the amount they have endured, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've endured world wars, they've endured economic recessions, they've
Correct.
endured perhaps different people running
Yeah.
that country,
Mm.
such massive upheavals in Europe over these
Mm.
years, and they're a global enterprise, across Asia Pacific, across Europe, across the Americas.
Mm.
And I think the fact that they are very clear about their core, which is their
Mm.
values, purpose, mission, and so on,
Mm.
they also, like any other living being, evolve over time.
Correct.
And as we go along in our journeys as people, perhaps you, Ashutosh, probably 15 years or 20 years ago, you were very focused on building companies.
Mm.
But today you're very focused on adding your learnings and learnings that you seek from other people,
True.
the value add to people. Now that's your brand.
Mm.
And that's going to be enduring, right? All these 1,000+ episodes are going to live on.
Absolutely.
So I would imagine that they also grow over time, and they're not scared to embrace that change and to express it very openly.
Mm. Very good. One more question related to branding, then I move to some of the other things that you are doing. Given that Renaissance is a B2B platform, my question to you is, how is technology changing branding?
Fascinating question. Let me think about how to answer this. I think at a fundamental level, I don't think technology is changing branding, because I think branding is about human relationships. Fundamentally, what is branding? Is like, this is who I am, and I exhibit a fragrance which allows, certain kind of people to be attracted to me. And that's about relationships. And I'm not sure if technology changes that. I'm interested to hear your view. Do you think it changes, or maybe there's a perspective I'm missing here?
No, the reason I'm asking this question is that the use of technology is actually helping brand managers, people who work on brands, to be able to work much more effectively. And when I was 40 years ago, when I started in marketing, etc., one used to see a very different format of communication. How do you build brands, etc. Today, the formats have changed, the communication has changed, the devices have changed. So that's what I was trying to ask you.
Yes.
But you're right. I mean, at the end of it, Brands have to stand on their own feet, and everything else is only an enabler.
Yeah, perhaps the interfaces have changed, right?
Right.
But at the core, the essence remains the
Oh,
same, and
absolutely.
relationships are still built uh, on trust and belonging.
Very well said. Very well said. And the customers or consumers' relationship with the brand can never be influenced by technology. It can only be improved. The
Yeah.
experience can be improved. Well said. So moving on, Jatin, you teach meditation and yogic life principles to entrepreneurs. Tell me about what you do and how does it help them as professionals?
Well, I was born in a really really spiritual family. So from a very young age, in our home we would be practicing meditation and yoga and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized as I 16 years ago I started my journey as an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
And I went through a phase where I rejected this upbringing, and I was obsessed with scientific way of doing things, right? Which was very logic focused. And I realized in the beginning, in the first few years of my entrepreneurial journey, I was able to build monetary success, but I wasn't able to feel happy. And I felt extremely unsatisfied by the end of it. And I started again kind of going back to my roots and saying, there were times in my life when I was really happy, and it didn't matter what I had, what I possessed.
Right.
And I started practicing, the practices that I was taught in my childhood again. And I started realizing deep equanimity in the way I would start interacting with people around me, with problems that we face on a day-to-day basis while building businesses, with all the challenges that come. And I also started operating from a more authentic place inside of myself. And then, at Stanford, somehow there was an opportunity which was presented to me where somebody said, "Hey, why don't you teach us what you do?" And I said, "Oh, well, I don't know. I've never taught anyone, but let me think." So I put something together. I taught a bunch of people from a few countries some of these principles and some of these practices. And some of them started following it. And we had a WhatsApp group together where they started, posting, "Hey, I did it today, and so on." And the ones who kept on it in a few months just started reporting incredible results, right? So for example, I remember this one lady, she was from Africa. She said, "I had blood pressure problems for the last 20 years. And 3 months into her practicing at home while running her business, she said, my blood pressure problem is gone." It's like, how did this happen? Like, well, that's just the way it works. And I started thinking to myself, maybe that's something I have to offer to people. And I've done that now. I think for maybe 13 or 1400 people who are business owners or C-suite, and just as a seva, just as an offering to, and it's helped them. So I believe that I think that people who are C-suite and are entrepreneurs have such an incredible opportunity because they're leading people and they're influencing people into building a better world. And it's so important for them to be centered within themselves, to be able to do that job to the best possible way, in the best possible way, rather than be stressed and pained by what they have undertaken.
Well said. Well said. Well said. And you're absolutely right. I mean, my own experience with yoga has been very, very rewarding. So I can understand how people who are learning from you are seeing very, very definitive kind of results. But Jatin, moving on, you were also inducted into the Paul Writers Hall of Fame for contribution to marketing. Tell me a little bit about this recognition that you received.
Well, I'm not even sure if we should talk too much about it.
Okay.
It just seems like, it comes across as a little braggy, if you don't mind me saying
No, why
that.
not?
So,
I mean, okay, just tell me about the Paul Writers Hall of Fame.
well, it's an organization which is based in Bangalore,
Okay.
and they I think they inducted a few people in their Hall of Fame.
Okay.
I just got lucky, I suppose, and then they thought I was worthy for it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So let me then move back to one or two questions on branding, and then or let's keep branding. Let me move to a few questions for you personally. My viewers and listeners love to get to know my guest a little better. My first question to you is, what would you say are 3 key milestones in your life or your career?
I would say that, so in the 16 years that I've been running businesses, my first 2 businesses failed.
Okay.
I think the failure of my second business was a very, very important milestone because it prepared me and it humbled me to see that, while we were lucky enough to have future successes, it never got to my head, and it kept me in deep realization that success and failure is both the play of a coin, and sometimes you'll get one or the other. The second would be the third venture which we ran. We exited, profit. We had an all cash exit back in 2012. And I think that was very important because it gave me confidence that, after 2 failures to experience some success, it just gives you confidence to say, things can go well, and this is how you can do it.
Yeah.
And I think the third one would be my moving away from India to Europe, and really building this global vision out of the company. Whereas earlier we were more focused on the Indian geography. And I think empowering our clients the ability to win across countries and cultures. I would say that's pretty unique out there. So it's a pretty exciting opportunity.
Wonderful. And my last question to you now, Jatin, and this is for the many, many viewers and listeners, a lot of them very young. What would you say are 3 lessons? You've been an entrepreneur, you're a marketer, you're an advisor, you've done, you do meditation and yoga. What would you say are 3 lessons you would like them to take away from our conversation today?
I would say the first one would be that branding is about authenticity. Whether it's your company's brand or your personal brand, it's about your authentic self coming out.
Yeah.
I would say the second one, at least the experience that I have had, is that there is a responsibility and an onus in leadership development for people to develop consciousness, to become conscious leaders rather than purely, top or bottom line focused.
Very good. Yeah.
I think that's an onus and a responsibility, and I would go as far as saying that should be part of leadership development in institutes and companies and so on. And the third would be just like what I've experienced in my life is that you go through some extended periods of failure, but that doesn't have to be forever there. So there can be, both success and failure is just a play of time. You just got to keep doing. You got to show up best every day, and the final scorecard just gets taken care by itself. You win some, you lose some.
Well said. Well said. Jatin, on that note, and your 3 advice of, authenticity, conscious leadership, and failure is not forever. Thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me about your journey, about the way you're building Renaissance into a B2B platform, which is global. Thank you for talking to me about your thoughts and views on branding and marketing, about meditation and all, and how what your teachings seem to be benefiting a lot of people. And finally, for sharing 3 very amazing lessons with so many of our listeners. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Really appreciate the platform you're building, and thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.